A partial view is a view that is rendered within another view. The HTML output generated by executing the partial view is rendered into the calling of a parent view. Like views, partial views use the CS/HTML file extension. If you think about it, similar to ASP.NET Web Forms, partial views are similar to user controls. It's a reusable section of the UI that you can associate inside of a main page. Partial views are an effective way of breaking up large views into smaller components. This can help reduce the duplication of view content and allow view elements to be reused. Common layout elements are typically specified in your layout.cshtml. Non-layout based reusable content can be encapsulated inside of a partial view. So in this lecture, we're going to start looking at partial views. Partial views are created like any other view, and they reside within the views folder. There's one main difference between how a view and a partial view are rendered, and that is that partial views do not run the _viewstart.cshtml. They do not focus on that piece. It's just a reusable markup that you can associate inside of your main view pages. There's many different ways to render a partial view. Partial views are automatically detected in the shared folder, and they also are detected within your default folders inside of your views. So in this case, we can come in here and let's just go inside of our home folder and let's click Add, New Item. We're just going to create a view and we're going to say First Partial View. And in this case, I'm just going to click Add and I'm just going to put some markup in here. And I'm going to put an h1 tag, my first partial view. And then under that, I'm just going to put a paragraph tag. This is my view. So once I have that, what I can do now is I can go into my index.cshtml page, and then under this my value h3 tag, I can put the @ and then html dot partial. And now once I do that, I can come in here and put in quotation marks to associate my partial view. So it's going to look for my partial view name, and in this case it's going to be the naming convention of first partial view. And once I do that, in this markup, you're going to see this first partial view rendered after the my value h3 tag. So let's go ahead and let's run this in the browser and see how this renders. And as you can see right here, what do we have? My first partial view, this is my view. So as you can see, after my value, I am rendering what's inside of my partial view, which is my h1 tag and my p tag. Another thing you can also do here is you can make it asynchronous. So you can put in a wait tag, and then you can make this async. And then once you do that, you're associating an asynchronous call to your partial view, and you're making it awaitable. So if you want to make it an asynchronous call where you can run other tasks inside of your browser, that can work as well. So if we go back here, refresh it, it's the same thing being rendered inside of the browser. It's just now being rendered asynchronously. So this is how views work. Another key item I want you to remember is that if I move this into the shared folder, it will work the same. But now, let's say I don't want to have it inside of my home folder right here. I can come in here and I can create a separate folder, or even in my main markup, to associate my partial view. So let's go new folder and let's just put partial view. And instead, this is where all of my partial views are going to be associated in. I'm going to take it from my home folder and I'm going to move that to my partial view folder. And once I do that, you're going to see the partial view associated in here. Let me remove it from here real quick. So now I have my first partial view inside of my partial view folder as a subfolder of my views folder. So if I go back here and I try to refresh this, you will get an exception error saying the partial view first partial view was not found in the views home first partial view.cshtml file, or it's not in the directory of views shared first partial view.cshtml file. So there's a very easy way to fix this problem, is that you can go into this index file here And you can make it relative to the root of the views folder. So we can say right here, views. And then we can say right here, partial view. And then we can come back even further and say dot CSHTML. And this should pick up my file now. So if I refresh this, as you can see right there, it's going to locate the view based on the application root. So we're doing it relative to the path of views, partial view, first partial view.cshtml. So if you want to separate your partial views into subfolders that are not in your main view folders associated with your controllers, you can do that as well. And this is what I'm doing right here. So I'm putting a separate partial view folder, and then I'm associating those items inside of that first partial view.cshtml file. And then inside of that, I'm rendering this basic information to associate inside of this page. Another thing we can do is we can manipulate data to associate inside of that view. So right here, remember in my first view, I'm looping through some data to associate inside of my controller. So right here in my home controller, as you can see in my first view, I'm associating a model list associated with the my data type, associating some values of my ID 1, my value first, and then setting it to my view model and then rendering it into my page. What I can do is I can go to my first partial view, and then I can take this data. I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. And the data that I associated directly inside of my first view page here, I can copy this. And I can put this in my first partial view. And then instead, I can just come into this page right here. I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. And I can say at html.partial. And then inside of that, now I can point to my first partial view. And it's going to go ahead and render that information to associate and loop through that data from the first partial view. So the first partial view is just a container to hold the information associated with what I was doing in my first view page, because it's still pulling the for each to associate in the section of my first view page. I'm just importing it into this page, and the first partial view is associating my for each loop. So now if I go over here and let's view this in browser, let's see if we have an issue here first. Yeah, I need to take this out right here. And then inside of my first view, I need to also associate the path, the relative path here. So we can say views, and we're going to say right here, partial view, first partial view.cshtml, right there. Now let's go ahead and go to my index. Let's view in browser. Now let's go to first view. So we're going to go to the home controller. Let's see where we're getting an error. Probably getting an error right here. So let's go ahead and remove that, refresh that. As you can see in this previous right here, I have these extra comments to associate here. So let's go ahead and we remove that out the area. We went ahead and removed that, and now look at that. It's looping through all of my data associated in my controller that I'm passing back to the view. So I'm passing back the view model, and it's pulling that information to associate right here, and I'm just rendering it through a partial view. It's performing that loop to associate with what's being passed from my home controller, and then I'm just rendering my partial view inside of my first view.cshtml page. So it's a nice way to separate different components of your application that can be reusable. So if you wanted to create like a login partial view and you want to implement a lot of different items that are reusable within your application, partial views is the way to go. Similar to ASP.NET Web Forms, you can think of it as how you would implement user controls within your application. In the next lecture, we're going to delve into a new concept in ASP.NET Core, MVC, and that's going to associate view components. View components are similar to partial views, but they're much more powerful. View components don't use model binding and only depend on the data you provide to call within it. So view components are what we will examine next. If you've dealt with ASP.NET MVC 4 or 5 or previous versions of MVC, you're very familiar with partial views, but in the next lecture, we'll start delving into view components.